Okay, all right. So we are recording. We are live on Facebook. Who knows how that is going to go? And so we'll do a quick introduction. Today we have Tom from Super Good Coffee Co. Tom, go ahead and say something so that the recording gets your screen.
Howdy, everybody. Tom here from Super Good Coffee Co. We're a local coffee roaster in Austin, Texas. And primarily, we focus on creating a environmentally friendly, as sustainable product as we can and try to bring that into the coffee world while also making coffee that tastes super good that anybody can drink. So anyway, today I'm going to be making a flash brew for us since we live in Austin, Texas, and it's summer. That means iced coffee, but you teach us how to make it at home.
Okay, awesome. And so do you want to go through with us, like, why do you do flash brew? What is it? And just a quick run through of the process.
Yeah. So flash brew is basically an ice pour over, a Japanese ice pour over. There's all sorts of different names for it. But really what we're doing is we're taking pour over hot coffee elements, but we are pouring it directly over ice as it's brewing. So in that way, you're going to kind of shock the coffee and instantly cool it. And so you'll end up with something that is a lot cooler, a lot more room temperature, and then you pour it over ice. So you'll see that our coffee to water ratio is slightly different. The way that I grind for a pour over is about the same, but sometimes I like to go a little bit finer on an ice pour over, so that way I can get a little bit more dwell time in here, because I find that whenever you're making an ice pour over, if you get a little bit of the bitter notes, that's okay. You can add like maybe some milk or something to kind of smooth it out. But having some acidic notes, I think in a cold drink is really unpleasant. So that's one of the ways that I like to kind of play around with that. But yeah, I think that ice pour over is a great way to drink iced coffee in the summer because it is low prep. All you really need is to add ice into your everyday pour over mix, instead of doing cold brew, which I like to do steep for 24 hours. You might need a cold brew setup or something like that. And it can be a little bit more of an exhaustive process rather than an iced pour over. You just, again, like we put some ice in here and then we're good to go. So you can make it perfect in, 100-degree mornings or afternoons or whatever. It makes a perfect brew for hot summer afternoons. And you can make a decaf that way too. So you can have an iced cold coffee drink that's also decaf. So I love it. I'm a big fan. I've been drinking coffee this way for years. Some of the other benefits of it, I think, are that you have a pour over method that is directly made for drinking iced coffee instead of making hot coffee, waiting for it to cool, letting it get stale, and then pouring it over ice, where you're also not taking into consideration like your original coffee to water ratio that you were brewing a hot coffee at, and then adding it over ice and then diluting it even more. So this ice is actually something that I figure into my coffee to water ratio. So that's one of the things that kind of helps it maintain more of its coffee integrity, let's say.
Absolutely. Yeah, that last point is kind of what how I got started with doing flash brew or Japanese iced coffee. Was just that like it was designed for iced coffee as opposed to like, let's throw some ice in a hot brew, and it makes a world of difference. Okay, before we get started, does anybody have any questions for Tom? No? All right, sweet. Tom, whenever you're ready, just take us through the steps, tell us what we need to do. I think some of us are going to be brewing along. I know I am. And some of us are just going to be hanging out, watching, and waiting for the Q&A session after this. So you're good to go whenever.
Can everyone see me okay? Or should I maybe get a little bit closer? That's good? Okay, cool. Yeah, from where I'm looking, it looks like we can see everything all right. Sorry if I'm a little bit sweaty. Just got off a run this morning and it was very humid out there. So I have my full kettle of water, I've already heated it to 200 degrees. So I like to use just any sort of jar here. This is like one of the quart-sized mason jars to brew in. One of the things that these work is because I also have that ice in there too. So whenever I'm brewing the hot coffee over it, it's not too hot to where it's gonna like break the glass that I found. But in case you're extra precautious, I also like to brew it in my Chemex as well. It's a little bit trickier though, because you have to put the water or the ice in there and then that sort of stuff. So, but yeah, you can use any pour over method to do that, because you just need to put ice into your ultimate serving vessel. So what I have right here is I have my grounds. Today I'm going to be making 2 cups. So I have 50 grams of coffee, and actually I'm using one that is not on our shelves because we're testing it out, but it's a little bit of a darker roast. It's our Honduras beans. So I know that some of those went out to some of you guys, and so this is just a little bit darker, but I think that iced coffee tastes great on if you use Africans as well. It's a really nice way to bring out the bright fruitiness. So whatever your serving pitcher is going to be, like I said, if we're making 2 cups, then I like to use 300 grams of ice. So weigh out 300 grams of ice, and then I'm going to use 500 grams of hot water. So you'll see that I have a slightly different coffee to water ratio here, where if I was making just a hot pour over, I might try to stick 1:14 coffee to water ratio. So maybe 50 grams of water, 50 grams of coffee and 700 grams of water. But here, I'm gonna go a little bit heavier on my water. So I have my paper filter and put it in here. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask me while we're doing this. I'm totally an open book. I have a question. Does how many of you guys live here in Austin? Anybody else live in Austin? No? That's okay. Where's everybody else from?
Live in Austin. I've not yet been outside today, so it's interesting to hear that it's humid today.
Yeah, it is not too cold, not too warm, but the humidity is definitely an issue. All right.
Yeah,
I have a question
Tim,
real
Steve,
quick.
and Joe from Austin. Yeah, go Tim.
Yeah, Tim. Sorry, you muted yourself.
Oh, I muted him. I'm sorry. Meant to mute myself.
The tyrannical mute from Wilson. You said you ground 50 grams of beans. Like roughly, like how fine of a ground are you talking here, Tom? Oh, Wilson, you did it again.
Good question, Timothy. Yeah, so actually for this one today, I did just whatever I usually do for this type of pour over too. So okay. You could call it a medium, maybe a little bit of a medium coarse, depending on your grinder. I have a Baratza Encore at home that I use. So I use it at a 20 if I'm going to be brewing in one of these guys.
Well, I have the same grinder and I literally guessed at 20. So perfect.
Yeah, it's a good one. If I'm going to be doing this, if I'm going to be doing a nice pour over on a Chemex, then I like to go somewhere between like maybe 22 to 24. But for this guy, and I haven't actually done as many on a V60, but I would guess that you'd probably be closer to like 16 on a Baratza Encore if you're doing V60. Okay, so I have my scale over here. Everything weighed out. I wet my paper filter just a little bit, but one of the major differences here is that instead of, if you notice, I did it over my little trash can instead of over my ice here, because I don't want to heat any of this water. I don't want to heat my vessel because ultimately I'm going to have a cold drink here instead of a hot drink. All right, zero out my scale. And get a little bit of our first bloom here. put in about 60, 70 grams of water and wait our 30 to 60 seconds. So if you can see in Wilson's screen also, I don't know if you guys have gallery view or speaker view up, but if you can see in Wilson's screen, that's one of our coffees as well. That's like our giant 5-pound bag of coffee, but we also sell 12-ounce bags of coffee too. And our two primary coffees that we sell are a Honduras and an Ethiopian. The Honduras from the Australia-Lenca region and the Ethiopian from Yirgacheffe. And they're both excellent coffees. And if you want something a little bit more everyday, more sessionable, like something that would be great doing this just every day, then I suggest the Honduras. But obviously, if you want a little bit of a fruitier experience, then the Ethiopian is a great option to go. And we sell a decaf on our website too. Okay. And like I said, so I had to repeat myself, 300 grams of ice, and I'm going to use 500 grams of water. So then what I'll yield is about 800 grams of beverage at the end, and which makes like pretty close to a good 2 16-ounce cups. And I'll pour those over ice and add a little bit of milk if I want to.
You know, one of my favorite things about this Japanese brew, this Japanese ice brew, is just how beautiful it looks coming down the side of the carafe when you're pouring.
Oh, yeah. Actually, yeah, I just noticed that Wilson's doing it in the Chemex too. So it's a little bit of a trickier way to do it, but I like doing it that way as
Wait,
well.
why is it trickier for compared to, are you using a clever right now? Is that what's going on?
No, this is actually a Melita.
Oh, okay.
I just think that it's trickier because you have the single serving vessel that you're also putting your ice into, instead of having your pour over and your serving vessel separated. So,
Oh, I see what you're saying.
I like to wet the paper filter beforehand. So whenever I do it with a Chemex, I typically end up not wetting that paper filter because I don't want to put any hot or any extra cold water that hasn't been steeped in coffee into my ice, into my serving vessel.
Okay, so one thing that I have to ask you about this this coffee, the Ethiopia that you sent it's darker than any other Ethiopia I've ever worked with before. And even now, like as I'm pouring, I can tell that it's like it's still got a whole bunch of like gases in there, and I'm like, should I let this degas more before I brew it, or is this something that Tom was going for?
With our Ethiopia, I wouldn't say that for those obviously at home who can't see what Wilson's talking about, we typically roast probably about a medium roast on most of our coffees, medium or medium light. Ethiopia's, like Wilson was saying, they typically get a light roast because they have fruitier and more acidic flavors, and more citrusy flavors. So to kind of bring that brightness out, most roasters will still maintain like a light roast. So you might only look for like 10 or 11% of moisture loss in roaster terms whenever you're roasting it, where most of our coffees, we go for like a 12 to 14% moisture loss. And if you're looking at dark coffees, those are like, 16 to 18% moisture loss in there. So in ours, we shoot for like a 12 to 14%. And so you're going to end up with something that is a little bit darker, but we like to dial in every single roast just according to its coffee and like how we think that it's going to turn out. So we'll do a coffee at 11, 11.5, 12, 12.5, 13, and so on percent moisture loss. And then just decide like, okay, this tasted great here, and this is where we find the most flavors. And we can also get the most consistency out of it too. While Ethiopian coffees can actually be a little bit more difficult, unfortunately, to work with because the bean is a lot more dense. It's smaller and a little bit more packed. So they can be a little bit, I'll just say, tricky to work with. So we find that we can get a consistent and we can get a really flavorful roast if we stick to like closer to a 12 and a half, I think a 12.5%, maybe 13% moisture loss on that Ethiopian. So it's just our preference. Yeah, thank you. It's just our preference in what the coffee is. We've tried like some other ones too that, man, yeah, it's a fun process because a lot of it is just trial and error with the roasting. Because you're trying to take what's great from a coffee and then bring it out as best you can, and who knows exactly what flavor is going to be in there. Yeah, you have a question.
Yeah, what roaster do you use?
So this one, yeah, you'll notice mine probably looks really dark. So this is a Honduras. This is our Honduras, but we're working with.
I meant what roasting machine?
Oh yeah, this is a Melita.
No. What do you roast on?
Okay.
Oh, gotcha. We use an electric powered. Gosh, what's the brand of it? It's a US Roaster Core 5 kilogram roaster.
Okay. Thank you.
Jeez,
yeah, you're welcome.
Huge.
That's pretty big. The drum is about like that big, I guess. So it's okay. It's for commercial roasters, it's like definitely on the small end. So from our setup and our space, like that's exactly what we want. Is we want to be able to make and fulfill small orders, serve small coffee shops, experiment with small batches and do stuff like that. So we have a smaller setup and we really appreciate that. And I think that someday, whenever we expand to, we'll probably stick with that and just get more smaller roasters. That way we can also keep that instead of making larger quantities, because obviously whenever you switch over to that, there's just a loss in quality control that you're able to handle. So, all right, so then this is ultimately what you're gonna pour over your ice. Give me 1 second, I'll go grab some ice. Okay. That you'll find that even though this is it's a cold coffee too, if you taste an ice pour over, like side by side next to a cold brew, you'll find that they are like almost completely different things. And if you read Wilson's latest email, I thought that he actually had a great description too of why these taste so different. But I think that they're both fantastic ways to enjoy coffee. So however you want to enjoy iced coffee, that's really great. I like this one because it's really convenient, and most people can just make it in their home day of too, or just on a whim or whatever.
We just had a tiny human try some.
Anyone else have any questions for me over coffee or the roasting process or different coffee brewing methods or anything like that?
Yeah, so I do want to say thank you, Tom, for taking the time to show us this. And yes, let's absolutely jump into the Q&A. This is more like the time where we get to sit around and chat. Ask Tom any of your questions about Flash Brew, about roasting, about whatever. And then my favorite part, as always, I will split you all off into pairs and you will get to meet a stranger. I've forgotten to create a prompt, so make sure to ask Tom questions so I have enough time to think about a silly prompt for when you interact with a stranger today.
And a little history about myself too. Before starting Supergood, while I was starting Supergood Coffee Roasters, I owned a coffee shop too for several years as well. So I have kind of a lot of experience behind the bar and making coffee, serving coffee, preparing it in several different ways, that sort of thing. Is a lot of familiarity with espresso machines. If you have any espresso questions, I love to answer those. Love talking about espresso, or any questions about running coffee shops too. I love doing that. I do consulting for friends with coffee shops and other clients as well. So roasting side or coffee shop side, I love answering questions that people have, or anything about coffee. It's great.
So
how long could you store this cold brew?
Yeah, that's a great question. Really, for one of these guys, I feel that it has a pretty quick degradation period. So I think like if you make it in the morning, by the end of the day, it's okay, but the next day, you're going to notice a lot of degradation in it.
Okay, cool.
Obviously, you can slow that process if you're going to drink it sort of throughout the day, or make a big sort of batch of it. If you have a giant Chemex or something, you can make it in the morning, store it in the fridge, and be fine. But I notice a little bit of degradation after about a day. I would say after 2 days, it's probably not gonna be great anymore. So that's one of the downsides about it, for sure. You can store cold brew, up to like a week or even 2 weeks if you refrigerate it. Whereas this iced coffee method doesn't stay quite as long.
Got it. Thank you.
I don't really know anything about coffee prior to this whole thing. My normal thing was to get off the train, buy a cup of coffee, and go into work. But
Yeah,
not a
we
lot
can't
of
do that
writing.
anymore.
Yeah, there has to be more than that. So like, what are the pieces of equipment that you kind of need to try some of these other coffee techniques?
This is a long conversation, but the short of it is you can make coffee really any way that you like. It all just comes down to personal preference. There are a few types of coffee that lend themselves better to one brew method or the other, but I would say that some of the most important things, the two most important things are the three most important things are having a good coffee, for one, having good water. Since coffee is 98% water, that actually makes a really big difference. If you're making it with tap water that you wouldn't drink by itself, don't expect to get good coffee. That's not going to magically make it taste better. And then 3 is the grinder. Because what you're doing in coffee, whether you're brewing it hot or cold, you are, going through a scientific particle extraction process. And so if you have grind size that are, if you have grounds that are, some are very fine, some are a little bit coarse, then your water, whether it's hot, room temperature, whatever, is not going to be able to extract the same flavor particles at the same rate if those grind sizes are like varying very much in size. So if you have a great grinder, like the one me and Tim were just talking about, a Baratza Encore, it's a really good grinder to have at home. I would say it's one of the most popular ones to have at home for coffee brewers. It's a little on the pricey side. It's I think $100 to $130 or something like that. So it's a little bit more of an expensive piece of equipment, but I think by far it is the best piece of equipment worth investing in, because then you can get a $15 Melita, a $20 AeroPress, whatever, and then your grinder can grind for all sorts of those brew methods, and you just need the one grinder. So I would say invest your money most in having a really good grinder. But really, that's all you need is good coffee, good water, and a good grinder. But if you do want to start with a less expensive grinder, I believe Cuisinart makes a conical burr grinder that runs like $30 or $40 or something like that. That's also pretty good quality so far as I've seen, but I haven't used it quite as much.
Ryan, another potential option is to go with one of these guys, a little hand grinder dude.
Yeah.
They are also, they're just like, they add to the ritual, is your morning ritual is what I'll say. That's how I'll put it.
Yeah, those are fun. You just crank it.
And never stop cranking it. They seem to take forever.
Yeah. Adds to the ritual for sure.
Hey Tom, so I'm more likely to be drinking like single servings of this, so you know, 1 cup as opposed to 2. I just like halved all the ratios that you said earlier. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's
or
perfect.
okay,
No, that's
all right.
perfect.
So I had it at about 25 grams of beans, 150 grams of water, and then 250 grams, or sorry, 150 grams of ice, and then 250 grams of hot water. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's perfect. That's what I would use too.
Okay.
If I was
Yeah,
doing a single
all I did
serving
was
of it.
double it. I doubled everything.
Easy. I have that you doubled it.
But I was gonna ask you, Tom, whether, oh, we got a latecomer. I was gonna ask you whether or not you pay attention to the timing when you do flash brew. So like, because I doubled the ratio, I assume that I should slow down. Is that something that you pay attention to, or you just kind of eyeball the brew as you're doing it?
I eyeball it, but that is a really good question to slow it down, because you're a little bit part of the science behind it is whenever you're brewing hot coffee, you're extracting your flavor particles from the grounds that you're spending in there. So your dwell time is going to be important, whether or not you're going to end up with a hot or a cold beverage. But if we are immediately pouring it over ice, then we're going to basically freeze that particle extraction there, which there is a little bit more of extraction that happens whenever the coffee goes through the rest of the filter, or sorry, comes out the bottom of the filter. There's a little bit of like flavor. It's not necessarily extraction, but it's a little bit more flavor release too. So I do like to spend a little bit more dwell time than if I was going to be doing the exact same brew method, but be making hot coffee too. So I just eyeball it. I don't time myself, but yeah, that is something to keep in mind there too. Yeah. So to increase that dwell time, sometimes I'll go a little bit finer, but sometimes I'll actually increase my coffee ratio while I keep my water ratio the same. That way I'm not, messing with my fineness, but I still am playing around with the coffee ratio, that parameter of it, to see if maybe on like a more sessionable coffee, or sorry, if I have something that's a little bit more of a sessionable coffee, then maybe I can be bringing out some of those bitter flavor notes that aren't going to be as harsh as drinking it in iced coffee as it will be drinking it in hot coffee. If that makes sense. Does that make sense? Is that a little bit confusing?
No,
Sorry.
that makes a lot of sense. I was just asking whether or not you had that approach to the flash brew as well. Flash brew is not something that I'm super familiar with. So that was helpful. Thank you.
When you say
Sorry, I think it was like, yeah, what's up?
when you say dwell time, what do you mean? Just like the amount of time that the water dwells in the filter, or?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Right. So whenever the coffee is in here with the with the grounds in the filter, how long it takes from whenever you pour it to go through the filter and then come out the bottom, that is what's considered your dwell time. So it's kind of like your brew time, or however you want to call it. But in the coffee industry, we typically call it our dwell time. So in a pour over, obviously you're adding water and it's filtering through because you're pouring over. So your dwell time for the water that you add in the early stage of it is going to be, it's going to be different than if you're doing like an immersion method of brewing in like an AeroPress or a French press, where your dwell time is, let's say 4 or 5 minutes, and you're immersing your entire, batch of coffee grounds in with the water at the same time. That's going to be a little bit different than with a pour over. So the dwell time that most brew methods shoot for is like 3 to 4 minutes, and that's basically because of the grind size of the coffee, the heat, the temperature of the water. So that 195 to 205 degrees Fahrenheit, that gives us a particular rate to work with of how we're going to extract flavors from the coffee. So that's where we get that 3 or 4 minute dwell time there. But that's what dwell time is. It's just how long it takes to brew, basically.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So so does anyone mind if I talk about espresso a little bit? Because this is, I think, one of the fascinating things about coffee as well, because there's so much science behind it. It's also very much an art, but there's so much science behind it. Most of the time, whenever we talk about coffee here, we're talking about filter coffee, which means, you know, coffee brewed at with the parameters of time and temperature, and that's it. But there's actually 3 parameters that we can use to make coffee. It's just like baking or cooking or something like that, right? Most of the time you're looking at time and temperature if you're baking something in the oven. But if you use an Instant Pot or a pressure cooker, then that changes everything, right? Because now you add that extra parameter of pressure. So that's the difference between filter coffee and espressos. An espresso machine actually brews coffee with the added parameter of pressure. And so that's why you can pull a shot of espresso in 30 seconds, as opposed to a dwell time of filter coffee, 3 to 4 minutes. So it's just a little bit of, I guess, trivia for you there.
Cool.
So I'm actually, next week we'll be doing the espresso one. So if you want to join on that, I would love to have you chime in as I'm working out on the decent.
Oh yeah, awesome. Yeah, that'd be great. Actually, and I believe my business partner in the roasting company, I believe he has that same espresso machine too. So I'm sure that he'd love to tune in for that as well.
Wait, what is his name?
Justin.
Justin. Okay, I'll have to look and see if he's in the decent forums. He may be. There's only like 3 or 4
Probably
people
is.
who have one of them.
Yeah, I would imagine that he is. He's very much a coffee nerd also.
Okay, well, cool. We have dropped a couple of people, so we're down to Misha and Joe. You guys are going to go meet each other.
All right.